where a poll says 60% of young Britons fear difficulty finding jobs against what is happening at the moment. And Starmer's refusal to rule out tax hikes has sort of added to the criticism of Labour's economic management. Lots of voices to come on this. We're going to speak to Issy Waite, National and International Secretary of Labour Students, also Maxwell Harrison, a Reform UK Kent County councillor. First, Michael Simmons, the economics editor at The Spectator. Good afternoon to you, Michael.
Good afternoon.
I said at the beginning, a very basic rule of economics, you can't tax your way into prosperity. Does that still stand?
Yeah, I think this is absolutely right. And this just shows kind of the doom loop that we're stuck in now. We're in this position where we've spent so much, we're spending so much, debt is so high that Rachel Reeves has this fiscal hole that every week a new report seems to come out saying it's even bigger. It's now apparently £50 billion. And she's going to be faced, frankly, with no choice because she doesn't want to cut the size of the state. She's going to have to hike taxes in the autumn. But part of the reason why the hole has got so big is because the country is just not growing and growth forecasts get downgraded and it adds more to what she's got to find. But by putting up these taxes, you make it harder for businesses to grow. You reported on those jobs figures just there, and businesses are not taking people on. They're not taking on more work. The economy is not growing. The tax take comes down. And then yet again, we get to another budget and taxes have to go up. So the cycle just repeats itself.
Labour may well say, well, had the Tories won the last election, it wouldn't look much different, to be honest. It was already going in that direction. Do you concur with that?
Well, look, I've got some sympathy with that view. I don't think the last government left the economy in a particularly good state. I don't think the Tories then sort of had the policies to really reform the economy that it desperately needs. That said, I do think Labour have done things that just objectively have made it much worse. We've had the Bank of England today saying that increased employment costs are contributing to inflation, that the bank now thinks will hit 4%. And if we read between the lines there, what they mean is basically the £25 billion raid on national insurance employers' contributions, which has just made it more and more expensive to hire people. So that's now stagnating the growth for reasons we just said, but also it's being passed on to consumers and making things more expensive.
What are the options? If she was sitting here now, Rachel Reeves, maybe along with Angela Rayner, because this does fall into her territory too in terms of things like council tax. What advice would you be giving them, Michael? Is there a kind of, there might not be a silver bullet, but there must be a few nuggets that could be thrown into the pot that would improve things?
Well, she's in a tricky position because she said she doesn't want to break Labour's manifesto and increase the big free taxes. Her backbenchers are not going to wear serious cuts. There's little things that she might be able to do to get her through this autumn, such as continuing the freeze on thresholds for when you start to pay income tax and when you go into higher brackets. That could get her something like £10 billion. She could tighten up, there's talks of sin taxes. She could tighten up some bits in inheritance tax that probably will fill this black hole. But when we get to the spring budget or get to the autumn budget next year, I think eventually you do run out of options, at which point whoever the chancellor is going to have to make a major decision, which is do taxes, and by taxes I mean serious taxes, income tax, VAT, do they go up across the board, or do you do the other option, which is seriously start to look at shrinking the size of the state?
Or could she come to the dispatch box, and I've never really seen a politician do this, and say, do you know what, we did make a promise that throughout this parliament we're not going to raise income tax, national insurance and VAT. However, look, times are tough. We've gone back to the room, had a little look, and we are going to have to break our own rule. Could you envisage that?
I think it's politically unlikely. She's going to do everything she can to avoid that. But if the numbers really are as bad as they currently look, she might be left with little choice. I do think if that's ever on the cards, it does make sense to do it now rather than, in 3 years' time when an election is a lot more, is a lot more in a clear-eyed view. You could do something really horrible on tax now, hopefully try and fix a bit of our economic situation, get the country in a better position, and then close to election say, oh, now I can do tax cuts. But I don't think Rachel Reeves has got the backing or really the will to do that. So I think it's unlikely.
Yeah, me too. Michael, thank you for your time, sir. Really appreciate that. Michael Simmons is economics editor over there at The Spectator. Let's speak with Maxwell Harrison, Kent County Council Reform Councillor. Maxwell, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. How are you?
I'm very good. You sort of fall into two camps here. You're young, so therefore you're potentially part of that poll that says young Britons expect the terrain to look pretty tricky in the years to come. But you're also a Reform UK politician, so I would imagine you would have some fairly robust advice for Reeves and Rayner.
Yeah, well, my advice to Reeves and Rayner is resign. That's my first advice to them. In terms of the outlay for young people, yes, it's dire. I mean, 28% of young people now are seriously considering leaving the country due to its lack of growth, to its lack of opportunity. If you take, for example, now 625,000 young people are unemployed, which means that unemployment now for young people is at 14.3%. It is a catastrophe. And I understand the sympathies of many young people, many of whom I speak to as friends, whether residents here on the Isle of Sheppey. Why remain in Britain? Seriously, why? The NHS doesn't work, the schools are full, can't get a house. Why would you want a family here? So it is actually quite a serious and significant problem. And if we don't actually have some sort of economic rejuvenation, this will simply get worse and worse until we eventually, in my view, have to head to the IMF.
But well, there is that speculation, of course. What can she actually do, bearing in mind she's put herself into this fiscal cul-de-sac of no tax rises when it comes to income tax, VAT on national insurance, although we can argue the case of employers' national insurance. But nonetheless, broadly, that is the promise, that's immovable. They're not going to change it unless they rework the term working people, which of course was always the kind of caveat whenever no taxes on working people. Do you think that's the area she's going to go for?
I think from what I've heard thus far, I think the term working people, whoever those people are, the hard-working Britons who wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, who already can't afford their food or their heating bills, I think they're going to get hit hard come this autumn budget. I mean, taxes, I think, will go up. I think it will be income tax. I think it will be a political suicide in many respects. But again, what can they do? They're trying to play around with the same big state. I understand struggles at local government. Most councils are bankrupt. In Kent County Council, we inherited £740 million in debt. Yeah. It's very tough to make decisions. I completely understand that. And I do actually have, as did the previous guest beforehand, I understand the point that they raise that they did inherit 14 years of calamity from the Tories. However, that being said, rather than growing the state, rather than supporting it, cut it by 50 or 25%. I mean, I would be as harsh to say, reduce it by 50%. Admit that some of your left-leaning policies on net zero, on mass uncontrolled illegal immigration, if you just put your hands up, say, this is costing us billions, rather than actually trying to put those costs onto the British people, we're going to gut them and cut them. If actually Labour said, no, we will just deport those who shouldn't be here, if they said, right, we're not going to commit ourselves to £830 billion between now and 2050 for net zero, I think people would have a lot of sympathy. Instead, they raised national insurance last year to 15%. Now 50% of businesses in the UK are looking at accruing those costs onto consumers, hence inflation will go up. And of course, 20% of businesses now in the UK are looking at reducing their investment. So it is, as your last guest said, a death spiral. It will only get worse and worse. And if Labour continue on this trajectory of not listening, make sure that we have no growth, already we've lost 6,000 businesses in agriculture, fisheries and forestry. Since last October, the situation will get worse and worse.
Maxwell, thank you for your time, sir. Maxwell Harrison, Reform UK, Kent County Councillor. Let's get a word from Issy Waite, National and International Secretary of Labour Students. Afternoon to you, Issy.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Is it a miserable old time to be a socialist?
Look, I think we've all been through difficult periods before. As a young activist, I think it's a really important time to be involved. I did campaign for this Labour government, and I'm very supportive of this Labour government and the action that they are taking to protect young people and young workers just like
What are
me.
they doing, though? Because that seems to be at the heart of some of this, that 60% of young people thinking, you know, they're going to struggle to find a job. They're not enthusiastic. I mean, the housing market is just a very, very distant thought, not even on the horizon. It's in another stratosphere almost.
Yeah, I mean, these are problems that my generation are absolutely facing, and we have been facing, I would say, now for the past couple of decades. It's something that I'm acutely aware of, having worked in the hospitality industry, so I've seen it from that angle, but also seeing it from the angle of a recent university graduate. I went through the job search myself, and I've seen my friends also go through it and have really difficult experiences. I do think that there is a lot of really positive action that this government has taken, and what I would really point to is the Employment Rights Bill. And this is something that is really personal for me, because when I was working in hospitality, didn't have a lot of this legislation. And so with things like exploitative 0 hours contracts, I mean, a lot of young people are on these very exploitative contracts and are being disproportionately affected just by a complete lack of rights in the workplace. We've also seen the discriminatory age bans. That's something that I think is highly unfair, that you're paid a lower wage just for doing the exact same job because you are. In my case, I was a few months younger than one of my friends who was paid a considerably higher wage for that. So I think there are huge positives in what the government is doing. And I think, for me, the biggest difference is that we do have a government that is on our side, is on the side of workers, of young people.
Do you feel that? Do you sense that in the heart of Angela Rayner, Rachel Reeves and these sort of big players on the front bench, that they have your back, as it were?
I strongly believe that, absolutely. And I think a really big part of that is acknowledging that there are huge barriers to getting young people into employment. And it's about removing those barriers, whether that's on the side of education, whether that's mental health. But one thing I would also point towards, and this is something that I've always really strongly believed, is that we do push people into taking the same path. So we push too many young people into going to university, even if that isn't the right path for them. So what I would definitely call for
on that, yeah,
is a more of a deep dive into how we can actually present opportunity. And there are opportunities in terms of vocational pathways and skills training, but it's about how we can show young people that there are alternative options. And that begins with careers training in secondary schools. It begins with telling people in year 8 what their possible options are. For me, it always felt as though when you graduate from secondary school, you go to university. And I've seen my peers also go on that same path, but that hasn't worked out for everyone.
Yeah, I could talk on that particular point. I could talk forever on that, because I also feel very strongly on that. And schools pretend, they say, oh, no, we do offer, we do tell kids there's another option. They don't really, do they? Because they quite like the Ofsted report that tells them that 90% of our kids went on to XYZ university. And that's frankly criminal, that they don't say, look, there's nothing wrong with going vocational, whether you want to be a bricklayer, whether you want to work in a hairdresser's, whether you want to work as a tool maker. There's a famous son of a tool maker that became Prime Minister, of course.
That's what they say. We need to celebrate those alternative pathways as well. I mean, they shouldn't be seen as like an alternative. It should be more normalised and more celebrated. Is
there a danger, and I just ask this really as you're a Labour supporter and you campaign for Labour, and that's, we're not North Korea, you can campaign for who you like, but this hasn't been a very good start for this government, even notwithstanding what they inherited, and we all know that was also a bit rubbish, but the popularity of this government, or the lack of popularity, has never really been seen in peacetime. I mean, they're in a horrendous place at the moment. Are you not sort of thinking to yourself, well, I'm a bit of a lefty, but those reform guys are looking pretty tasty at the moment. Maybe I'll cross over the fence?
Absolutely not. I mean, I see through what reform are saying. They have correctly tuned into what a lot of people see, that things aren't working. Absolutely, I would agree with a lot of that. But I do think that, where's their record? What do they have to show for it? If you look at their individual policies, I have serious doubts as to how they're going to finance a lot of their plans. And to be honest, they're making these big promises, especially around immigration, that I just don't think they're going to be able to deliver on.
You could become a Tory, of course. Kemi Badenoch needs all the friends she can get at the moment.
Well, I ran against Kemi Badenoch in the general election, so I don't think I'd be joining her party anytime
Well,
soon.
I don't know. She might invite you in. Who knows? Listen, Issy, great to have you on. Thank you. Issy Waite is National International Secretary of Labour Students. And her assessment, I don't think I'm overstating it, is that actually she thinks this government are doing rather well. Now, we can say, are you blind? Are you mad? And all that kind of stuff, whatever way you want to take it. But clearly they won an election and there are still Labour supporters who think they're doing all right. It's hard to believe when you look at the stats of businesses closing and, as Maxwell Harrison just mentioned, youth unemployment that's at, 14% or something horrendous like that. Small businesses absolutely struggling, impossibility of getting on the housing ladder. None of this, not all of this, of course, was the creation of the Labour Party, but they are now the government. It is literally their job to create the environment and the circumstances where things can thrive, they can grow, and you can leave school, get on with life, or wherever you're at in your career or age bracket, you can go, I'm living in the right place. I'm living in a really good place, a land of great opportunity where the chances of things growing and doing better are clearly tangible and visible by the day. That's the country you want to live in. And by the way, you know, here we are in the year 2025. That should be a given by now, right? That should be a given.